So Sameer, just a short introduction. I wanted to say good evening and a warm welcome to the viewers from all over the world. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the CEO's Chair is a unique program where we showcase inspiring stories of successful CEOs. We give you an insight into their mindset and not only discuss their challenges, but also help you understand their definitions of success and leadership. Today is a very special episode because it is the 40th episode, and I couldn't have thought of a better CEO to join me on this episode, Sameer Chadha, CEO of KPMG Global Services. Welcome once again to the CEO's Chair, Sameer.
Thank you, Siddharth.
So Sameer, I wanted to come back and probably talk about the pandemic and the lockdown in a little bit more detail, but I just wanted to check in with you, make sure that you are okay, your family's okay, and you're coping up well.
All well, Siddharth. Thank you. And again, thank you for inviting me. A special show, 40th, as you say. I wish that was my age, but anyways.
It's all in the mind, Sameer.
It is. Yeah.
So Sameer, you're a CA by training. You started your career with Nestle. How did the transition into banking happen? And you've been in banking for almost 30 years now.
Yeah. So, just when I said, 40 is not my age. Thank you for talking about my 30 years of experience, right? I am a chartered accountant, and I guess I started off my career in Nestle, as you say. And it was an interesting thing because we used to audit them. I was articling with a firm which used to audit Nestle. I audited them every year for 3 years. And in the final year, they said, if you qualify, we'll give you a job, right? So I qualified and I got the job. And at the 3-year mark, I got married. And also at the 3-year mark, as one of the rotational opportunities that would have come up for me was to go into a factory setting. And, as a newly married person, I didn't think it was entirely conducive to my marriage to land up in a factory setting where, I would have been busy. I'm not entirely sure how my wife would have kept herself engaged. And, we were a young couple. I was mid-20s, she was early 20s. And so at that point in time, I decided that, should I look at something else? I had a friend in banking. Bank of America at that point was setting up its retail franchise in India. And he introduced me into the organization. I went through a couple of interviews, got the job. And then, continued in banking for a number of years, banking and or financial services for a number of years, till 2016 when I left Barclays and I joined KPMG Global Services. So I've been here for the last 4 years. So started off with consumer goods, FS and banking, a large part, and then the big four for the last 4 years.
Perfect. So like they say, behind every successful man, there is a very, very special woman. So I think we can give your wife a lot of the credit for your success.
Indeed.
So Sameer, I actually skipped over a brief introduction. I know that most of the audience members are huge fans of yours. But for those that aren't or don't know you as well, like we discussed, it's been almost close to 3 decades of a career that you've had. You started with Nestle. You worked with some very well-known global names like the Lehman Brothers, Bank of America, First Source Solutions, and you joined Barclays as Chief Operating Officer, became CEO of Barclays Shared Services, and of course, like you said, transitioned into KPMG Global Services. So Sameer, coming back to the lockdown and the pandemic, the last 3 months have probably been, and I'm sure, the most agile, the most taxing that you've had in a very long time. How are you personally coping up with everything that's going on?
So see, I think my own style is very people heavy, and my style is very when I'm in office, I find it difficult to sit in my office for too long. I'm walking around the floors. I'm trying to meet people, right? Mm-hmm. So that kind of leadership style takes a beating in this kind of an environment, right? So I think one of the things I've had to do is that get onto the organization uses Teams very extensively, right? So basically communicate far more through Teams, and then make sure that I'm always on camera. And I've always noticed that, if you switch on your camera, the others automatically somehow mostly feel obligated to switch on their cameras as well. Plus, it's easy to walk up to a desk and meet somebody, and you can't really do that currently. So, I'll make calls to people from time to time. I'll send them WhatsApp messages. I'll figure out what's happening. So you have to reorient your entire leadership style to kind of wrap your arms around people in a virtual world rather than in a physical world. That's been, in my view, the primary change, quite apart from the whole thing of how do you enable everybody to work from home? How does that run effectively? Once that's out of the way, then it's how do you make sure you can communicate effectively with people?
True. And Sameer, and I've spoken to a couple of people that have worked with you over the years as well. You're known as somebody who leads with authenticity and empathy as well. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, in a time like this, when you're not able to physically meet people, and that's such a huge part of your leadership style, how do you establish trust with, let's say, remote teams or people that you haven't already been working with?
So I think, my own sense is that trust is, the fundamental tenet of whether it's a personal relationship or a professional relationship, right? And ultimately, trust is driven by, in my view, transparency, right? So you have to be very transparent about things, right? And in either case, that is how I naturally am. But in the current environment, when people are worried about jobs, when people are worried about the future, when people have so much ambiguity to deal with, right? I think you need to be even more transparent than you normally are, right? Which means that you have to tell people about what are you dealing with as a leadership team, as you think about both within KPMG, we are focused on making sure our employees are safe and the business is healthy, right? And what do you do to make sure that people understand what is the thought process of the leadership team? How are we thinking about how long do we stay, at home? When we come back, how will we come back? What are we thinking about jobs? What will happen to promotions? What will happen to increments? And fact of the matter is, even if you don't have the answers, you have to tell people that we don't, and we are dealing with them. And once we have clarity, we will come back and tell you. And I think that ultimately they say, sunlight is the best medicine for driving, transparency and trust. And I believe in the fact that to drive trust, you have to be transparent. You have to say what you mean, right? And then you have to do what you say.
Okay. No, I think that's a great statement. And a lot of us have been talking about management philosophy for a very long time. And I think the last 3 months have actually been a testing ground for the leadership styles for a lot of us. Sameer, you talked about the future of work as well. What do you think has changed in the last 3 months that people will have to, either adapt or evolve about themselves and their leadership style for the future of work?
So I think if I talk about leadership styles for a moment, I guess we all have to become comfortable about dealing and communicating and managing teams in this virtual environment. I have a leadership team of 10 or 12 people, and ultimately you're all sitting on this, laptop screen, right? Trying to stay connected and engaged. Okay. So I think usually if you're an office and your teams, let's say you're managing a team of 15, 20 people, if you are like, let's say a team leader or somebody, they're all in front of you. How do you now suddenly, or mostly in front of you, but how do you now manage an environment where they're all distributed, right? So one is your leadership style has to now adapt to getting comfortable to deal with people virtually, to manage performance virtually, to be able to drive team camaraderie, in a virtual way. So I think that is a key thing. And then the whole thing about, I sometimes think it's ironic. There is so much talk about work-life balance, and now it's gone to the next level where the work-life continuum has become completely indistinguishable, right? You're sitting at home, you're working, then, your kid will come up and say something, your wife will come up and say something. The boundaries have become so blurred. So somewhere along the line, one has to become a little hard-coded about self-discipline and being able to distinguish both of these. And I think it's incumbent upon organizations also not to assume that just because somebody is at home, right, that they're available to you all the time for work-related stuff. There were certain work times earlier, and I think, one shouldn't blur the boundaries outside of that too much for people, right? And I think from a future of work point of view, again, it's early days. We are still in the middle of the pandemic, and we haven't, we are still working through it. But for sure, I think an enduring percentage of people will continue to work from home on an ongoing basis now. If we have had X thousand people working from home for the last 3 months and will do for the next couple of months, then what is the need for everybody to come in? We've tested it now at scale. So I do think one thing that will happen is, and many people have announced it, TCS has announced it, Infosys has announced statements of intent, right? That there will be an enduring percentage that will now work from home on an ongoing basis. I do think that sometimes things like part-time workers, part-time workforces, the gig economy, I think they will take a kind of they will be given a flip, because earlier, if I was a part-time worker and I had to commute the same amount of time as a full-time employee and do only half the work, it kind of wasted most of my day anyways. But now if I can effectively work from home for a large part, that commuting angle goes away completely. And therefore, I think the ability to start seeing if part-time workforces are able to be used at scale is something that will happen. Plus, I guess the last thing is that, probably business travel will take a beating. There are some elements which you have to do. I think that will always stay. But earlier, if you had to go into the US for, like, let's say, a meeting for 2 days and come back, and now you can effectively do it at the end of a, video call. I mean, just look at this environment, right? I mean, you're sitting in your home, I'm sitting in my home, right?
Absolutely.
I'm more casually attired than you are, but the fact is, we are in the middle of a business meeting, which normally you would have probably landed up in my office and had to do it, and and that cuts off the need for travel.
True. I read a very interesting short post on LinkedIn the other day where one person was talking about how the size of the box on a virtual meeting like this for the CEO is the same as it is for an intern. So when you talk about, connecting with everybody on a human level, that's essentially what it comes down to.
Lovely.
So Sameer, you're somebody that has inspired change. You're somebody that has led change a lot in your career. You've been known as somebody who goes into a company, and especially Barclays. I mean, you increased not just the size of the organization from a couple of hundred people to over 10,000 people in the time that you were there. What are your thoughts on change? Can change be managed?
I think, the subject of this talk is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think, this, the cliche is, that change is constant. Apologies, it is a cliche, but it is very true, right? And I think, yes, will change continue to happen? Of course. How you deal with change, I think, is a big thing. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So let's take the current pandemic situation. Okay. Mm-hmm. We've had to take our organization of 10,000 people and they've had to go work from home almost on an overnight basis, right? And we've had to make sure that, while we keep employee safety at the center of everything, that the business also continues working effectively. Okay. So many teams across the organization came together, to enable this, the IT teams, the admin team, the HR colleagues, et cetera, et cetera. And then we initiated a series of decisions to make sure, that people feel comfortable and that communication became the centerpiece of everything we do. So I think, ironically enough, the number of connects we are doing, right, during this point is exponential to what you would normally do in a normal BAU scenario, right? Okay. So I think it was very interesting that there was a big change impetus. The organization, ours, and I'm sure so many across the entire environment, mm-hmm. dealt with it in a way which actually ended up strengthening the culture and making people felt valued by the organization at this point in time, right? And I think that is one way of how you can deal with change, that you adapt to it, you get stuck into it, and the net result of a crisis turns out to be something positive, which is, quite apart from the ways of working, that the culture of colleague centricity gets strengthened by actions during this period, right? And the other thing is, and I think the other personal change in Barclays, as you said, when I joined 2008, I was the chief operating officer. 2010, I became the CEO. And there's a huge difference, right, between being the number one in an organization and the number two in an organization, right? And sometimes you don't realize it till you're thrust into that role, and when I got into it, you suddenly realize that the buck stops with me. I need to understand the HR function, the finance function, the IT function. Earlier, I was only looking at the operations functions, right? And you go through that horrible, butterfly and stomach moment where you get up and you think, oh my God, I'm not in my comfort zone like I used to be. Somebody's going to ask me something. I'm not going to know the answer of that something. You get into that zone of, discomfort. So the only way, at least I find I have dealt with this, is that you get stuck into it, right? You learn what has to be learned, and then you end up becoming comfortable with what you were not. And I experienced exactly the same when I moved from a bank into a Big Four, right? I have no prior Big Four experience. I'm an accountant by education, but you have to unlearn everything and then relearn everything, right? So I guess at some point in change, you have to just know, irrespective of the level. I changed as a CEO of KPMG, right? Irrespective of the level, the butterflies in your stomach are going to remain exactly there. And you have to give yourself time to work that out, and don't put pressure on yourself saying, I have to learn it as fast as I can. Of course you do, but acknowledge the fact that there is going to be discomfort, there is going to be a learning period, then only will you cross over into the period of comfort.
Got it. Sameer, you bring up two very interesting points. One is, of course, there is a saying that crisis brings people closer together, which I think is on huge display during this entire pandemic. The other one was actually part of a question that came up to me from the audience, saying that, how do you deal with something? For example, I had Pallavi Sachdeva reach out to me saying that the rules of the game have changed for everyone. There is tremendous opportunity for everyone. So what advice would you have for leaders that have been working in a specific style throughout this time or before this time?
And I think, Siddharth, from a leadership point of view, I guess, some of the answers I've already given. There is a certain complexity in dealing with a distributed team. There is a certain complexity in managing performance in a certain team. I think at some point, all of us are at some level control freaks, right? And you have to be able to let go and trust in people that they'll do the right thing and you'll manage, by exception. So I think that's one thing. And again, I think from a more personal level, at the end of the day, the lack of commute has given us all time. And, most of us always say that if I had more time, I would have, and then you can choose from spend more time with my families, picked up a hobby, learned another skill. I think now you have more time on your hands. So, if I would just suggest that use that time wisely.
Got it. So, and you have no excuses at the moment. No one has any excuses. I'd like to encourage everyone to ask questions as much as possible. We have Sameer here, and I don't think it's very often that we get to have him on a live chat like this. Sameer, what do you do to stay focused? What inspires you?
Yeah, so I think, in terms of what inspires me, and let me answer it the other way around who inspires me. So I think in a corporate sense, two individuals have, always inspired me. One is, Jack Welch, and the other is Indra Nooyi. And the reason is that for me, that they managed to make the complex sound simple. Okay. And I think that is a great leadership attribute. If you can make a complicated topic sound simple, that is the surest way of making sure that everybody understands it and absorbs it. Otherwise, it's very easy to get caught up in the corporate jargon and, the mumbo jumbo that we sometimes hide behind, right? So I think these two individuals, I think every time I've heard them speak, in fact, it's interesting. There were so many times, early stage career and all, when I used to feel overwhelmed at times, right, with the situation. I used to always tell myself, if Jack Welch can manage GE, right, then I can manage what I'm doing right now, right? So I remember that used to be a thought process in my head. And I think on a more personal level, my parents both passed away some time ago, and my mother, at least, suffered. She was a dialysis patient, right? And that's a difficult disease to live with. And I was always inspired by her attitude towards that, right? And how she kind of was resilient in the face of that adversity, and how she actually managed to wrap it all up in her daily life and, make it exactly a part of her life. And I always do think it's amazing, right? How she'll never let on to her family about the fact that she's suffering, which means she would never put, in corporate life, it's easy to put pressure. You feel pressure, you transmit the pressure down, right? But I always saw from my mom that her suffering was very personal to her, right? It never ended up becoming something that the family had to, pick up along with her. And the fact that she just drove through that adversity with so much grit and resilience, right? These are all things that we think about in corporate life, right? That how do you deal with adversity, right? That you have to just work your way through it.
Absolutely. And there's always somebody who's struggling and whose struggle you know nothing about. Exactly.
There are some Q&A questions I can see on the base of my screen. Presumably you can...
I can. Okay. And I'll bring them up to you as well.
No worries.
So I've already had a few of the audience members email me some questions in advance. So I'll start with those if that's okay.
Sure.
I've got a Prakash Dash who's a big fan of yours right from the Barclays days. And he's wondering that what prompted you to take the transition from being CEO at Barclays to CEO at KPMG?
Okay, so that's, I think, an interesting question. And, so I joined Barclays, and you alluded to the fact I joined it in 2008. It was about 600 or 700 people. Mm-hmm. And, along with a very talented team, we built it up to about 10,000 people by 2016, right? And then at that point, it started, plateauing out. And, one starts thinking about, 4 years ago, I was 4 years younger, right? And at that time you think that I have another, 10, 15 years in my career, is it this or, I've somehow I've always been involved in situations, whether it was in Lehman Brothers, it was, a big brand, but they were starting it up. I joined Barclays, big brand, they were building it out. And then the KPMG opportunity came through, frankly, and, and I had a couple of conversations, at that point in time. They were definitely not a startup by any sense of the word. They were already quite large, but mid-size wanting to become bigger, right? And wanting somebody who had shared services experience. It was an industry I knew nothing of. And, it was therefore appealing to me in the sense of learning something new. It was based out of, the NCR region. That kind of worked for me as well. I really enjoyed, I liked the people who I met during the entire interview chain. And then, people told me that KPMG has a really good culture, right? And so many people outside the industry who I tried to ask about feedback about KPMG, that's all they told me, right? And some of the answers I got from the interviewers about the culture of KPMG also appealed to me. So I guess it was a combination of, a particular organization was built to a certain level, another organizational opportunity in a brand new area kind of presented itself, and, and things worked out.
Sameer, and you talk about this always learning mindset as well. And I know that a lot of people talk about it, but is it something that needs to be inculcated throughout your career, or is it something that only comes once you reach a certain seniority level?
No, and I have to tell you that, thanks for the prompt, Siddharth, because I cannot overemphasize this enough, this whole learning mindset, right? In KPMG, we call it having a growth mindset, right? And one of the things that is said in KPMG is that become a student of the firm. And quite honestly, the point is that you need many skills for jobs, right? Some are, of course, technical skills, right? You need to be an accountant, you need to be an engineer, you need to be, a stats grad, a maths grad, whatever you have to be, right? But the fact is that fundamentally, if you are not willing to keep learning and growing, right, that is imperative in the current environment, where there was a time during my father's time that you join one company and you continue a certain discipline and you exit that company, and that was it. Right now, I've already in 30 years, I've done maybe 5 or 6 jobs. I'm not particularly the kind of guy who likes rotating too often. So maybe I've done a job or two, maybe more than I thought I would have when I, when I think back on it. But the point is that unless you have the ability to learn, and the audience here, all I will say is that the person who is most interested in your career is you. It's not your supervisor, right? It's you. You are the one who's most invested in your career, right? An organization can only create frameworks, learning opportunities, job opportunities, etc. You have to grab them, right? And you have to say that if I am in a field X and somehow analytics appeals to me, right? Then do some courses in analytics that makes you attractive for the hiring manager, as opposed to saying, I want to move into analytics. That's not enough, right? You have to be able to learn. And I think for me, when I joined, KPMG, I have to say that, I was fortunate. I kind of identified 3 or 4 individuals who became my gurus. And I kind of peppered them with questions till, I improved my knowledge. And I'm a voracious reader, right?
Okay.
With one knowledge, with one aim, that to grow, you have to keep learning. And that I think is, absolutely imperative in the current context.
No, and you bring up a great point as well, Sameer, that in an organization, let's say like KPMG, where I'm sure you have a very structured mentorship program or people that can mentor you throughout your career. If somebody's working, and I have Pooja who's asking that, how do you find a guru? How do you find a mentor? Or where do you find one?
I think, the point is that they're all around you, right? They don't have to necessarily be in the organization. Can end up becoming, friends of yours who are good sounding boards. They can become your spouse. They can become family. They can become somebody in an organization, right? And I just think that, the whole term mentorship at some levels becomes a formal construct of a mentor or a mentee. But simply spoken, it's all about learning from somebody else's experience. If I'm a mentor to somebody, it's not that I'm so much more gifted than you. It's just that I've had more experience than you, and therefore I can speak to you from my experience and help you with some of the kind of, let's say, decisions you kind of sometimes struggle with. So I think the mentors are all around. Reach out and talk to them. I kind of informally mentee many people, right? Sure. And this is not like something formal. But when they have career issues, they'll call me up. When they're dealing with something, they'll want to chat with me, and so on and so forth. And similarly, for me, when I was in Barclays, sometimes when you're the the top guy in an organization, you sometimes, it does feel lonely sometimes. But I was always very clear that whether it was some members in my team, whether it was somebody outside the team, I always knew that I would go to certain individuals when I wanted to have a differing view. And that is true in KPMG as much as it was in Barclays.
So it could be as simple as somebody whose advice you trust, and maybe somebody who's doing what you want to do.
Exactly.
So a couple of interesting questions. I've got Amit who's asking, the customer behavior is changing and most of the people are looking for free services. How do you see this changing the landscape of demand and supply, as well as training and development in organizations?
So, I'm not sure that free services beyond a point in time are, a sustainable proposition. There has to be a revenue model. Now, whether, you say that, a newspaper, depends on, let's say media depends on advertising, and that's their entire model, right? I'm not sure that, free services are the way to go, right? But the fact of the matter is that everybody now expects more for the same value, right? So if I'm paying X, I expect more from it than I did earlier. And that, I think, it's incumbent upon organizations to become smarter, slicker, more efficient so that they can continue providing value, right, for a price point which is not escalating at the same level. That's the way I see it.
Absolutely. And that value could be intangible as well. It could just be extra attention.
Yeah, it could be. I'm seeing some questions scrolling on my chat. So I'm wondering, should
I'll take them into account as well, Sameer.
Sure, okay.
Yeah,
my first time in doing this, I know it's the 40th time for you. I'm just seeing all of this happening, so I'm wondering.
No, don't get distracted.
Okay,
you just focus on just being you.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why I do this, Sameer, is because I want to kind of give access to people, to the CEO, to the entire CEO mindset. That what is it that CEOs go through? And I think you are pretty vulnerable in sharing that it does get lonely as a CEO sometimes because there's only so many people that you can confide in. I have a question for you saying that, hi Sameer, I'm Amit Nagpal. What is your biggest fear? The wall that you're addressing or fighting right now?
Sorry, the second part is?
Your biggest fear, what is the wall that you're addressing or fighting right now? The wall.
Yeah, so, see, I think for me, let me answer that this way, right? If somebody asks me what is it that I want to be known for, right, is that I want to make a difference. So whether it's in an organization or whether it's in a personal life, I want to make a difference. I want to be remembered for somebody who left a legacy behind of something else, right? So I guess, so indirectly, therefore, what scares me is not being relevant anymore, right? So I guess that's the way to think about it. I want to be able to contribute. I want to be able to, make a difference. I want to be able to, make people feel that, hey, this guy has left a legacy behind which was better than what he found it. And I am relevant in the context of, let's say, my job, right? And I guess that is my fear that, that you end up not being relevant.
No, and I doubt that will ever happen, Sameer. I have Kamalpreet asking Sameer that in this day and age where we can't be as in physical proximity with our friends, with our colleagues, and with our co-workers as much as possible, what advice do you have for your teams to overcome this gap and still stay motivated?
So again, you have to use the opportunities to connect with people. There are so many tools available now. We are on a Zoom call right now. There are Teams calls, there are Skype calls, there are WhatsApp calls. There are so many, and I know there is FaceTime. I'm not an iPhone user, but I know there are so many other opportunities to stay connected, right? But the fact is you just have to use the mediums available to you, right? One thing that I have come to know during this period is that social connectedness is of deep value to human beings, right? My younger son, I have two boys. The younger one is telling me he's missing school. I would have never thought I would hear those words out of his mouth ever, right? But he's not really missing school. He's missing his friends, right? But the point is that we are social creatures, right? And we need that interaction, which is why this entire period has become so difficult. And I think we need to find ways of doing it. There are innumerable examples in KPMG of, people having competitions and, you're seeing that Zoom screen broken up into multiple, small screens of people doing fun things. And that's how you have to keep yourself energized, right? I kind of look forward to the engagements with my team because, you feel energized by all of that rather than, just sitting in your home in front of a laptop.
Very true. And I hear a lot of organizations are having happy hours as well, not especially on the weekends. So maybe that's something that you can spearhead.
I'm a teetotaler, so my idea of that is slightly different. Yeah.
So I love the specific questions that we are getting, Sameer. We have somebody called Ruchika Gupta. She said that she heard you speak a long time ago about a leadership shadow. What do you suggest for budding leaderships to start that?
Yes, Miss Gupta, thank you for that question. And she's employed with KPMG, used to work with Barclays, and now working with us. Okay. And I think the leadership shadow is an interesting concept, right? And I think this is one piece of advice that I tell people, that you're always being watched, right? So whether you feel it or you know it, you're always being watched. One is the obvious, I'm being watched in this context of this interview, right? Correct. But in organizations, people are always watching you. They're always watching that he says authenticity is important to him. He says humility is important to him. He says diversity is important to him. But does he act in a way which actually shows that? If I feel diversity is important to me and I go into a company, offsite or a retreat, and I start behaving slightly inappropriately after a point in time, right? That's about people seeing what you are doing rather than what you are saying. So I think, the leadership shadow for people is be conscious of it, be conscious that people are watching you. And in my 30-year career, I have learned from leaders both what to do and what not to do. So you got to be careful that your leadership shadow is the kind which people want to emulate rather than people want to actually not emulate and say, that's not the kind of leader I want to be. So you're always casting a shadow, whether you know it or not. You just have to be sure that you are controlling, the messaging and how you're being perceived by people.
Sameer, you're talking about diversity and as well, because you're known as somebody who is a big champion of diversity, both in Barclays as well as currently in KPMG. If I was to ask you that, what is it according to you that you see women leaders doing well, and what would you like to see them doing even better?
So let me answer the second part of that question, right, about what women should do, right? And so I'll tell you a small anecdote. The anecdote is that they say that if you ask a woman to apply for a job which has 10 attributes, if she knows 8 of them, she'll say, I'm not sure whether I should do it because I don't know 2. But if you ask a man the same question and he knows 2 of them, he'll say, big deal, I'm going to go ahead with it. I'll learn the other 8 on the job. Right now, this is a humorous anecdote. I'm a guy, so no offense meant to anybody. It just shows you a mindset of how people approach this, right? I've kind of read a reasonable amount of literature on some of this stuff. So I would ask women colleagues that, believe in yourself, right? Please, when roles come up, be confident to have that voice to go up there and say, I want to do it. More often than not, the received wisdom is that men will be more outgoing and say they want to do something. The women will normally not be, that, let's say, forthcoming about it. So that's one thing I would say that please do. And the second thing I would say is that please pay it forward, right? Help other women along. At the end of the day, I'm a huge, champion of diversity and inclusion, generally speaking, but I'm saying at the end of the day, the specific struggles that women have to go through in a corporate career, I don't know because, I'm a man, and therefore I feel you've gone through it, you've learned it, and you know what it takes. You're now a role model. Make sure you sponsor other women to come through that whole thing. I think from an organization's point of view, to working mothers, I salute them, because frankly, to manage home and I have to say that sitting at home for 3 months, one thing I've realized how much hard work it is to run a house. It is unbelievable the amount of effort that goes into run a house, right? And I'm saying for working mothers who are, managing children, managing home, managing, offices, I salute you. You need a environment to flourish, right? From a personal point of view and a professional point of view. From a personal point of view, whether your parents are supportive or whether your spouse is supportive, that's something in your personal domain. From the corporate point of view, we can make sure that we create an environment of flexibility, of policies, of, being easy and understanding of your experience. And that is what, at least I have endeavored to do for a long time. And this is an agenda that has to be driven from the top, right? Because unless you put that impetus behind it, unless you put that focus behind it, in the hubbub of work, sometimes these agendas can, move into second place. And I think that's why they need executive focus to be behind them. And, in terms of what can women do well, I mean, I would answer that by saying that women are as great managers as a man. I mean, at the end of the day, there is really no distinction. We have to make sure that we are hiring competent people. We are not hiring, because we have to hire a woman candidate to tick box something or the other. We have to hire for competence. So, I have, worked with women both as part of my team, as part of, my supervisors in the past, right? And I think, at many levels, I can't really answer that. What is it? The received wisdom is that women can multitask far more and are empathetic far more. That's just the way they are, right? So I would just say that this world needs people who are more empathetic. So please continue being empathetic.
Absolutely, Sameer. And I think I'm just having some technical difficulties on my end. So thank you for keeping going. I have Abhishek asking you that challenges are something that every person, every CEO actually goes through. And that's, it's part and parcel of what you do almost on a daily basis. And you talked about executive presence, you talked about a leadership shadow as well. What is it that a CEO, or what is one of the most difficult decisions that you've had to take in your professional career?
I think, it's not a question of, I guess in terms of the most difficult decision and all, I'm not sure, I think for me, there are elements where if you believe that values are important, right? If you feel integrity is important, respect is important, whatever the values of your organization are,
Absolutely.
right? Are you willing to call that out amongst people who are senior as opposed to only amongst people who are junior, right? Are you able to take a hard line even when it's not so easy to take a hard line because the person who's, reflecting that behavior is a great performer, is an A-rater, knows how to get things, but is doing the how part of the what is being done in a very non-values led way, right? So I've had issues in the past where one has had to call out these behaviors, right? And one has had to have those difficult conversations, and sometimes those conversations are absolutely very difficult to do. And I think those are examples. Plus, I guess the current environment in itself, right? How is the future going to be? How is the growth going to be? What kind of impact does that have on your own organization, on the employees, etc.? These are very hard calls to actually take, right? When people are involved, real human beings who have feelings and who you have to think about, right? Anything that impacts people negatively, right, is a difficult thing to do. But I do feel that in personal life, maybe my wife disagrees. I'm a non-confrontational person. I don't want to get into confrontation, right? But in corporate life, you have no option but to take on head-on bad behavior, right? And difficult decisions. You can't say that I'm seeing somebody in my team exhibiting behaviors which are just anti-values, but I'm going to keep quiet about it because I don't want to confront it. That's not my nature. No. In corporate life, you have no choice. You have to call out bad behaviors. You have to be able to take the hard calls. That's ultimately what being a leader is all about.
Absolutely. And I think, like you rightly said about the role of a CEO, the buck stops with you. So it's not as if you can just look around and say somebody else's problem, I don't have to take care of it. So Sameer, I also wanted to ask you that the more senior somebody gets, it's difficult not to get a little bit of a big head. It's difficult not to have a little bit of an ego with all the success that you've attained. And there is a lot of talk about even personal branding at the moment. I have a couple of people that have obviously worked with you in the past that are saying that how do you balance your personal brand and your ego with staying grounded the more senior that you become?
So, it's, so I'll tell you, I'm a big movie buff. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a big movie buff. I see everything and anything, right? In fact, I feel the share price of Netflix is so high because I'm such a big consumer of Netflix. But the deal is that in the movie, The Last Samurai, there's a scene in the end where Tom Cruise is talking to the emperor, right? And for those who haven't seen the movie, in either case, there's an emperor and Tom Cruise is a warrior. And, the emperor tells Tom Cruise that it's important to know where you're going, but never forget where you're coming from, right? And for me, humility is very fundamental to my whole makeup, because at the end of the day, it's very easy to a point to get, caught up in this whole thing that I'm a senior guy, etc. But truly, can anybody be successful without their team? I mean, today, if KPMG is doing well or KGS is doing well, it's not because of me. It's because the 10,000 people there do things day in, day out to make us successful. In Barclays, it was not successful, because I was leading it. It was successful because there were 10,000 guys coincidentally there as well who were actually, driving the agenda. And there are no individual superstars, not even Federer and not even the people who are individual sports people. There are coaches behind them, the families behind them, there are, physios behind them. There's a whole apparatus of people, right, who actually make you successful in any endeavor in life, right? So I think humility is absolutely fundamental. And I think success, how would you define it? So let's say being senior is, if it's considered success, right? All of this is really ephemeral. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow, right? At the end of the day, people should be able to relate to and value you for the person you are, not for the role that you held. Okay. I've always thought to myself, India is a country full of elections. They're happening all the time. That I always tell people that if you were to be elected by your team, would they elect you as their leader? Or have you been foisted upon them because of the organizational process, right? So I think, humility is absolutely fundamental. In my book, there is no attribute more off-putting than arrogance, right? Because, ultimately speaking, as I said, so many people are actually behind everybody who's successful.
Very true. And I think it's actually a responsibility that's been given to, and the way that you carry is a lot about the person that you are as well.
Correct.
We've got a lot of people asking us about skills you look for in a leader. So if you could possibly break it up between, let's say, early managers and then probably senior managers, what are the kind of skill sets that you would want to see in up-and-coming leaders?
So I think, so we leave the technical skill sets aside, right? Those are a function of the job you're doing, right? If I was to talk about, the softer skill sets in life, right? So I think authenticity, right? About, doing what you say, saying what you mean, building trust, being transparent, right? Being, valuing humility, right? Respecting people. It's very easy to respect people who are above you in the chain, right? But can you respect, people who are, who you don't have to be nice to, right? So that I think is very important. And I think the other thing is that get comfortable with this whole concept of being uncomfortable, right? Because we are staying, I sometimes think of my elder son, he's 23 years old, he's just starting off his career, right? And I sometimes think that his career is going to be so different. He's going to be in an environment which is changing at such a rapid pace, right? And how do you get your mind to actually, stay focused around that? So I think this whole thing about getting comfortable with discomfort, it's such a difficult thing to do because human beings crave, normalcy, but you somehow have to get out of that and kind of, make yourself comfortable and then, have patience, please, right? For at least the young leaders, please have patience. Careers take time to build. This is not coming from somebody that I'm a CEO and therefore I'm telling you be patient, right? I've worked 30 years. The point is, there is this, in this here and now world of instant this, instant that, instant gratification, right? Careers are not instant. They take time to build, right? There is a saying which says that to become an overnight success, you have to spend decades, right? And everybody just, values that success. So be patient, guys, right? It takes, like they say, 9 months for the most part to produce a baby. It takes 12 years to go through, school. It takes you a certain amount of time to go through, corporate life. Don't be in a hurry to get to where you have to. You will get to where you have to. Luck has a big part to play in corporates and life generally, but generally speaking, talent normally finds its way through.
Well said, Sameer. So we actually have people asking you for book recommendations as well as movie recommendations.
Oh my gosh.
maybe two of each. You said that you're a voracious reader. What are you reading at the moment, Sameer? Yeah,
so interestingly enough, you know what, I actually, I'm glad AI can still concentrate enough to read books at a stretch, but I actually, I coincidentally just finished reading this book by Milind Soman, right? So he wrote a book on, his, it's called Made in India, right? And I think it's called Made in India. It's his kind of autobiography about, him and it's a really instructive book because when you think of him, you think of a model, you think of somebody who's, a kind of a movie star kind of thing, but it's a really thoughtful book about how he's written about his approach to life. So I think I read that, and currently I'm in the middle of Malcolm Gladwell's new book called Talking to Strangers, right? Okay. And so I'm trying to get time to. Mostly I used to read books when I was actually flying between places. Now that's a thing of the past, so I have to figure it out. But in terms of Netflix and other recommendations, please send them to me on LinkedIn, right? I'm wanting to know content. I finished Patal Lok a long time back, which I thought was really, really interesting to watch. And I watch anything and everything, and I'm currently watching Homeland. So I'm catching up on some of the old Homeland series.
Very nice. And what's your favorite movie character? You're such a big movie buff. Let's say one from Bollywood and one from Hollywood.
I don't know, favorite movie character.
That's really stuck with you.
No, I think, for me, so this is so horribly cliched, right? But I'm a big fan of Mr. Bachchan, right? I just think that here's a guy who has reinvented himself, through the times. And he has gone through adversity. He went through a terrible phase in his career, and then he's managed to rediscover himself. They're making movies for him, on the assumption that everybody has seen, the movie Pink and all that. I mean, he is at the next level of epicness of how, a movie star should be. And I just think, he's also conducted himself. When you hear him talking, he sounds so humble and he sounds so grounded, right? And he sounds so respectful. These are all attributes which really strongly resonate with me, frankly.
No, very nice.
It's cliched for an Indian to say that they are very, very inspired by Mr. Bachchan.
No, but like you said, a lot of, your personal and professional life is centered around the values, and that's how you've lived it. And luckily, not really luckily, but it's really worked for you. Your success, a huge part of that has been because of the authority that you have.
Yeah. And I'll just say one more thing, my apologies. And when there was this question about what advice would I give to other managers and, people at different stage, the one advice I would also give you very strongly is corporate life. Somehow there is this belief that is driven by only intellectualism. So it is driven from your head. Everything is to do with intellectualism, right? But I strongly believe that you have to lead from the heart as much as you have to lead from the head, right? I'm not, afraid of showing emotion in the slightest, right? The fact of the matter is human beings relate to human beings, right? Human beings, the reason why when you're seeing a certain ad and, you get a little teary-eyed, or you're seeing a scene in a movie is you get a little teary-eyed because there is some emotion in that which manages to resonate with you, right? Not to say that people are not inspired by intellect. Obviously, people are inspired by intellect. Absolutely, people are inspired by intelligence and intellect. But don't be afraid of saying, I am going to bring my heart into the job as much as I'm going to bring my head. And, people have asked me in the past that, given that your leadership style is people heavy, does it not make having difficult conversations with your people even more difficult, right? And my sense is not at all. The reverse happens. If you have a good personal equation with your team, then landing difficult messages with respect is actually much easier than landing them if you have a more formal, corporate relationship. So don't be under this illusion that somehow only intellect is what is important in corporate life. After all, what is a corporate? It's made up of people, right? People relate to people. People don't necessarily relate to, a kind of a, just plain intellect.
No, very, very, very well said. And I think you brought up a part earlier as well, where you said that personal and professional lives are blending. There is no work-life balance anymore. It's all just one persona. Sameer, a few last thoughts that you'd like to leave us with. Anything that you think that we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about as well?
No, I think I've managed to cover everything. I guess, thank you, Siddharth, for this opportunity. Really kind of, I'm delighted to see so many names from both the past and the present on the panel list, right? It brings back so many memories and nostalgia, right? I have such good memories of so many of the people on this feed. And, hopefully, some of the distilled messages I've given resonate with people and they are able to use them or mold them in, their own personal situations.
No, you really have, Sameer. And I think this is just testimony to the fact that you've made people feel a certain way. You've touched a chord in every person that you've interacted with. So on behalf of the CEO's Chair, one, I'd like to really thank you for taking the time. I know you don't do a lot of these talk shows. So, taking the time to do this. We wish you and your family good health, Sameer, now and of course beyond. And nothing but continued success in your career as well.
Thank you, Siddharth. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed this. Thank you for making it a nice, easy conversation. Really appreciate it. Absolutely. And thanks everybody for dialing in. It's listening to people speak for 1 hour is not easy, right? 50 minutes on this point. So really, really appreciate everybody who took the time to register and to to dial in for this. I hope it was worth your time.
It definitely was, Sameer. Take care, Sameer. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you.
Bye-bye. You too.
Bye-bye.